The massive ship known as the Perseverance moved slowly through the darkness of space. Its metal hull gleamed under the light of distant stars. Inside, Captain Hannah Kim stood at the bridge window, hands clasped behind her back. Her dark eyes watched as the alien world grew larger before them. "Varus Prime," she said quietly, "home of the Varian Empire." The blue-green planet was wrapped in swirling white clouds. It looked peaceful from space, but Hannah knew better. This world was the center of the most powerful empire in the known galaxy, an empire ruled by a queen who struck fear into the hearts of every species that met her. "Captain, we have permission to land," said the young man at the communication station. "They're sending coordinates now." Hannah nodded. "Thank you, Ta. Take us in." As the Perseverance began its descent, Hannah felt a weight on her shoulders. She was leading the first human delegation to the Varian Empire. Earth had only figured out faster-than-light travel 30 years ago. They were newcomers on the galactic stage, and now they had been summoned by Queen Xara herself. The stories about the Queen were troubling. No one had ever seen her face. She always wore an ornate mask. She had ruled for over 200 years without aging. Some said she could read minds. Others whispered she could make people do terrible things just by willing it. All agreed that those who defied her disappeared without a trace. Nervous, Hannah turned to find Lieutenant Jaiho Park standing beside her. Unlike the rest of the crew, who wore the blue uniforms of the Earth Diplomatic Corps, Jaiho wore the black uniform of security personnel. Before becoming a diplomatic security officer, he had been Special Forces, one of Earth's best soldiers. "Wouldn't you be?" Hannah asked. Jaiho shrugged. His face was calm, almost too calm. "I prefer to wait and see things with my own eyes before I decide to be scared. That approach has nearly gotten you killed more than once," Hannah reminded him. Jaiho's mouth curved into a slight smile. "Nearly." The ship shuddered slightly as it entered the atmosphere. Hannah watched as the capital city came into view. Tall buildings of crystal and metal reached toward the sky. Flying vehicles zipped between them like insects. It was beautiful, but also alien in ways that made Hannah's skin prickle. "I want everyone ready for the welcome ceremony in 1 hour," she said, turning to her team. "Remember the protocols. This is the most important first contact humanity has ever made." The welcome was elaborate. Tall, blue-skinned aliens called Varians lined the path from the landing pad to a massive crystal palace. They wore flowing robes and stood perfectly still, like statues. Other alien species watched from behind barriers, some with tentacles, others with too many eyes, some that seemed to shift form as Hannah looked at them. Hannah led her team down the path. Beside her walked Dr. Jun Lee, Earth's foremost xenobiologist. Behind them came Su Jin Yoon, their communications specialist, and several other experts. Jaiho and his security team formed a protective circle around them, though their weapons had been left on the ship as a sign of good faith. At the palace entrance stood a tall alien with skin the color of burnished gold. Its 4 arms were adorned with jeweled bands. "I am Visor Krell," it said, its voice translated through the small devices in the human's ears. "First Minister to Her Eternal Majesty, Queen Xara of the Varian Empire. You will follow me." The palace interior was even more impressive than its exterior. Ceilings soared hundreds of feet high. Light filtered through crystal walls, creating rainbows on the polished floor. Alien art and technology that Hannah couldn't begin to understand lined the corridors. "The other delegations are already assembled," said Visor Krell as they walked. "You are the last to arrive." "We came as quickly as we could after receiving the invitation," Hannah replied politely. "Yes, your species' technology is primitive." The alien's tone made the word sound like an insult. "It is surprising Her Majesty wished to include your kind at all." Jaiho's eyes narrowed at the comment, but he said nothing. Hannah kept her face neutral. "We are honored by the invitation." They entered a massive circular chamber. Around its edges stood groups of aliens from at least 20 different species. Some Hannah recognized from briefings. the insectoid strill, the gelatinous mori, the reptilian sarn. Others were completely unknown to her. "The humans have arrived," announced Visor Krell. All eyes turned to them. Hannah felt a chill as she realized that many of the aliens were looking at them with what seemed like pity. "The Queen will arrive shortly," said Visor Krell, pointing to a space where the humans should stand. "Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not approach the throne. Do not make sudden movements." As the visor walked away, a small greenish alien with large, sad eyes approached them. It moved with a bobbing gait on 3 legs. "First time meeting Her Majesty?" the alien asked in a whisper. Hannah nodded. "Prepare yourselves," it said. "The fear is overwhelming. Some faint. Try not to. She dislikes weakness." The alien bobbed away before Hannah could ask what it meant. "What was that about?" asked Dr. Lee. Before Hannah could respond, a deep gong sounded 3 times. The chamber fell completely silent. "Her Eternal Majesty, Queen Sara of the Varian Empire, ruler of the 3 spiral arms, conqueror of the void, approaches," called out a voice. The massive doors at the far end of the chamber swung open. 4 large aliens carried in a floating platform. On it sat a figure that made Hannah's breath catch. Queen Sara was tall, at least 7 feet, and draped in flowing robes of deep purple that seemed to move even when she was still. But it was her mask that drew all attention. Made of what looked like gold and studded with jewels, it covered her entire face. It was shaped into a beautiful but emotionless visage, with slitted eyes that glowed with an inner light. As the platform was set before a raised throne and the queen rose to her full height, Hannah felt a sudden wave of something. It began as unease, then grew quickly into anxiety, then blossomed into full, paralyzing fear. Her heart pounded. Sweat broke out on her forehead. Her breath came in short gasps. It took all her willpower not to turn and run from the room. Around her, she could see the other humans experiencing the same thing. Dr. Lee's face had gone pale. Su Jin's hands trembled. Even some of the security team looked shaken. Only Jiho seemed relatively composed, though his jaw was clenched tight and his eyes had narrowed to slits. "Welcome, representatives of the Gnome worlds," said the queen. Her voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, reverberating in Hannah's chest. "I have summoned you to witness the expansion of our glorious empire." The queen's masked face turned toward the human delegation. Even through her fear, Hannah felt a chill of recognition. They were being singled out. "Humanity," said the queen, "the newest spacefaring species. You have been brought here to formally request the protection of the Varian Empire." Hannah swallowed hard, fighting through the fear. This was why they had come. To establish diplomatic relations, she had to speak. "I, Your Majesty," she began, hating how her voice quavered. "I am Captain Hannah Kim of Earth. We are honored by your invitation and look forward to discussing peaceful relations between our peoples." A murmur ran through the alien delegations. The queen's head tilted slightly. "There is nothing to discuss, Captain Kim of Earth. Your species will accept our protection and the terms that come with it, just as all others have." The terms had been sent ahead. They were harsh. Earth would have to pay heavy tributes, accept Varian oversight of all space travel, and allow Varian advisors to join Earth's governments. It was not an alliance. It was submission. "With respect, Your Majesty," Hannah said, fighting to keep her voice steady, "we would like to negotiate." "There is no negotiation." The queen's voice grew colder, and with it, the fear in the room intensified. Hannah felt her knees weaken. "You will accept our terms, or Earth will face the consequences." From the corner of her eye, Hannah saw Jiho's hand move slightly toward his belt, where a small device was hidden. His eyes met hers briefly, and she saw something there she hadn't expected. Not fear, but suspicion. We request time to consider the terms," Hannah managed to say. The queen was still for a long moment. The fear in the room was so thick that several members of other delegations had sunk to their knees. "You have 3 days," the Queen finally said. "Then you will give me your answer." She made a gesture with one hand, and the platform was lifted again by the 4 carriers. "This audience is concluded." As the Queen was carried from the room, the fear gradually subsided. Hannah felt her legs trembling, and she took a deep breath to steady herself. What was that?" Dr. Lee whispered, his face still pale. "That, Dr. Lee, is how she controls the galaxy," said a voice behind them. It was the small green alien from before. Fear, not ordinary fear. Something more. Something that reaches into your mind and finds your deepest terrors. "Psionic ability?" asked Sujin, who had studied reports of species with mental powers. The alien made a gesture that might have been a shrug. "So it is believed. No one dares question her." "Thank you for the warning," Hannah said to the alien. "May I ask your name?" "I am Milo of the Trebi. We have been under Varian protection for 90 years. The alien's large eyes looked sad. "I advise you to accept the terms. Those who refuse do not survive." As the alien moved away, Hannah turned to her team. "Let's get back to the ship. We need to discuss our options." But as they were escorted out of the palace, Hannah noticed Jai-Ho looking back at the throne room with an expression she knew well. It was the look he got when something didn't add up, the look that had saved their lives more than once in the past. "What is it?" she asked quietly as they walked. Jai-Ho's voice was so low that only she could hear it. "Did you notice the ceiling in the throne room? The strange patterns in the walls? The way the fear hit us all at once when she entered, like someone had flipped a switch." "What are you saying?" Jai-Ho's eyes met hers. "I'm saying that in my experience, Captain, the things people fear most are often the things they understand least. And sometimes, the most terrifying monsters turn out to be nothing but smoke and mirrors." Hannah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Queen's presence. "You think it's some kind of trick?" "I think," Jai-Ho said carefully, "that I'd like permission to do a little investigating before we decide the fate of our planet." Hannah thought about the Queen's masked face, the unnatural fear, the absolute control she seemed to have over dozens of advanced civilizations. If there was even a chance. "Be careful," she said. "If you're wrong, you could doom Earth." Jai-Ho nodded, his face serious. "And if I'm right, Captain, I might just save the entire galaxy." Back on the Perseverance the human delegation gathered in the conference room. The air felt heavy with worry. Captain Hannah Kim stood at the head of the table, her face serious as she looked at her team. "We need to make a decision about the Queen's terms," she said. "We have 3 days." Dr. Jun Lee shook his head. "The terms are impossible. Earth would lose its independence. We would be slaves in all but name." "But what choice do we have?" asked Ta, the young communications officer. His voice shook slightly. "You felt that fear. How can we fight someone with that kind of power?" Around the table, the other humans nodded. The memory of the throne room was still fresh, that terrible fear that had made them all weak. "Other species have accepted these terms," said Dr. Lee. "Some have lived under Varian rule for centuries. They survive." "Survival isn't enough," Hannah said firmly. "Not for Earth." The door to the conference room slid open, and Jai-Ho walked in. He had changed from his formal uniform to a simple black jumpsuit. His face was calm, but his eyes were alert. "Lieutenant Park," Hannah said. "Do you have something to report?" Jai-Ho nodded. "I've been doing some research. I spoke with aliens from 3 different species while we were at the palace. None of them could tell me what the Queen looks like under her mask. No one has ever seen her eat or drink in public. Her appearances follow the same pattern every time." "She's over 200 years old," said Su Jin-yoon, looking up from her datapad. "Maybe her species lives a long time." "Maybe," Jai-Ho agreed. "But there's something else. I managed to take some readings in the throne room." He pulled out a small device from his pocket. This is a scanner we use for security suites. It picked up some strange energy patterns in the throne room. Patterns that don't match anything else we've seen in Varian technology. Hannah leaned forward. What kind of patterns? I'm not sure yet. That's why I'd like Sujin's help. Jiho turned to the communications specialist. You're the best at finding patterns in data. Sujin looked surprised but nodded. I can try. What exactly are you suggesting, Lieutenant? Asked Dr. Lee, his brow furrowed. Jiho's face remained neutral. I'm not suggesting anything yet, Doctor. I'm just investigating. Hannah studied Jiho's face. She had worked with him long enough to know when he was holding something back. You have a theory. Jiho met her gaze. I have a question. What if the fear we all felt wasn't some psychic power? What if it was technology? A murmur went around the table. That's impossible, Dr. Lee said. We would have detected. Would we? Jiho cut in. We're dealing with technology hundreds of years more advanced than ours. Think about it. A signal that affects the fear center of the brain. Different for each species, carefully calibrated. Hannah considered this. If Jiho was right, it would change everything. But if he was wrong, I need more than theories, Lieutenant, she said. I need evidence. Jiho nodded. That's why I need to go back to the palace, unofficially. You mean sneak in? Tai asked, eyes wide. That's crazy. If you're caught. I won't be caught, Jiho said simply. Hannah knew that tone. Jiho had already made up his mind. She could order him to stand down, but if there was even a chance he was right. You have until tomorrow night, she decided. Then we need to start preparing our official response to the Queen. I'll go with him, Sujin volunteered. When everyone looked at her in surprise, she added, I can help analyze the data on site. It will be faster. Jiho looked like he wanted to object, but Hannah nodded. Fine. But be careful, both of you. The fate of Earth may depend on what you find. The Varian capital was different at night. The crystal towers glowed with soft blue light. Flying vehicles moved in orderly lines between buildings. Security drones patrolled the streets, their red sensors sweeping back and forth. Jiho and Sujin moved through the shadows, wearing dark clothes that helped them blend in. They had left the ship through a maintenance hatch to avoid being seen. Are you sure this is a good idea? Sujin whispered as they crouched behind a low wall, watching the palace in the distance. No, Jiho admitted, but it's the only idea I have. They had studied the palace layout from scans taken during their visit. There was a service entrance on the east side that seemed to have less security. Remember, Jiho said quietly as they moved toward it, if we get separated, return to the ship immediately. Don't wait for me. Sujin nodded, though her face suggested she had no intention of leaving him behind. Getting past the outer security was easier than expected. Jiho used a small device to create a brief glitch in the sensor grid, and they slipped through. The service entrance was guarded by a single Varian who was more interested in his datapad than his duty. Now comes the hard part, Jiho whispered as they entered the palace through a service corridor. We need to get closer to the throne room without being seen. They moved carefully through the dimly lit corridors, ducking into alcoves whenever they heard footsteps. The service areas were a maze of narrow passages and storage rooms. Twice they had to hide from cleaning drones that hummed along the floors. Wait, Sujin said suddenly, putting her hand on Jiho's arm. Look at this. She pointed to a panel in the wall that looked different from the others. It was newer, with different markings. Jiho examined it without touching it. It's not Varian design, he agreed. It looks like it was added later. Sujin took out a small scanner. There's power running through it, a lot of power, and it connects to. She frowned at the readings. It connects to a whole network of similar panels throughout the palace. They all lead to the throne room. Jiho's eyes narrowed. Can you follow the main power conduit? Sujin adjusted her scanner. This way. They followed the power signatures through the service corridors, moving deeper into the palace. The panels became more frequent, and the power readings stronger. Finally, they'd reached a door marked with symbols that neither of them recognized. "The power conduit leads here," Su Jin whispered. "Whatever's on the other side is using massive amounts of energy." Jai-Ho studied the lock on the door. It was complex, but not impossible. He took out a small tool and began working on it. "Jai-Ho," Su Jin said quietly while he worked. "If you're right about this, if the Queen is using technology to create fear, what does that mean?" "It means she's not as powerful as everyone thinks," Jai-Ho replied, focused on the lock. "It means there might be a way to." The lock clicked open. They looked at each other. Then, Jai-Ho slowly pushed the door open. The room beyond was filled with machinery. Banks of computers lined the walls. In the center stood a large device that hummed with power. It looked like nothing they had seen before, a mix of technologies from different worlds, all connected to a central core that glowed with blue light. "What is this place?" Su Jin whispered, stepping inside. Jai-Ho followed, closing the door behind them. "I think we just found the source of the Queen's power." Su Jin moved to one of the computer banks. Her fingers flew over the controls as she tried to make sense of the alien technology. "Can you read it?" Jai-Ho asked, keeping watch at the door. "Some of it. It's a mix of languages, but the basic command structure is similar to systems I studied." She frowned in concentration. "This is Jai-Ho. This is broadcasting on multiple frequencies. Neural frequencies. Fear signals," Jai-Ho said, his suspicions confirmed. "Yes, but it's more than that." Su Jin's eyes widened as she scrolled through the data. "There are image projections, voice modulations, environmental controls. This isn't just creating fear. It's creating an entire presence." Jai-Ho moved to her side, looking at the screens. "The Queen," he said quietly. "They're creating the Queen." Su Jin nodded slowly, or at least enhancing her, making her seem more powerful, more terrifying. She continued to scroll through the data. "These systems are old. They've been upgraded many times, but the core programming is centuries old." "Can you copy this data?" Jai-Ho asked. Su Jin took out a small device and connected it to the console. "I'm trying, but there's so much." A soft alarm began to sound from the console. "What did you do?" Jai-Ho asked, instantly alert. "Nothing. I just..." Su Jin's face paled. "Jai-Ho, someone's accessing this system remotely. They know we're here." Jai-Ho pulled her away from the console. "We need to go. Now." They ran to the door, but before they could open it, they heard voices and footsteps in the corridor outside. "Back door," Jai-Ho decided, pulling Su Jin toward a smaller door at the rear of the room. It led to a narrow maintenance shaft. They climbed inside just as the main door opened, and several Varian guards rushed in. The shaft was tight and dark. They crawled as quickly and quietly as they could, hearing the sounds of alarms spreading through the palace behind them. "Did you get anything?" Jai-Ho asked as they crawled. Su Jin held up her device. "Some, not all, but maybe enough." They emerged from the shaft in a different part of the palace. Alarms were sounding now, and they could hear the heavy footsteps of guards searching. "This way," Jai-Ho said, leading them down a service corridor that should take them back toward the outer walls. They turned a corner and found themselves face to face with a tall alien with golden skin and 4 arms. Visor Krell. His eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in anger. "Humans," he hissed. "What have you done?" Jai-Ho didn't hesitate. He stepped forward and struck the visor with a precise blow to what he hoped was a vulnerable spot. The alien staggered but didn't fall. One of his 4 hands reached for a device at his belt. Jai-Ho grabbed his arm, but the visor was stronger than he looked. They struggled, and the device fell to the floor. Su Jin darted forward and grabbed it, then backed away as Jai-Ho and the visor continued to fight. "Run," Jai-Ho shouted to her. Get back to the ship. For a moment, Sujin hesitated. Then she turned and ran, clutching both devices, her data copy and the visor's mysterious device. Jaiho allowed himself a small smile as he faced the angry alien. Even if he was caught, the mission might still succeed. The visor's eyes burned with fury. "You have no idea what you've done, human," he said. "Actually," Jaiho replied, shifting into a fighting stance, "I think I'm beginning to understand exactly what's been done to all of us." Sujin ran through the dark streets of the Varian capital. Her heart pounded in her chest. Behind her, alarm sounds rang out from the palace. Flying security drones zoomed overhead, their searchlights cutting through the darkness. She clutched the two devices tightly, her data copy and the strange device that had fallen from Visor Krull's belt. She felt guilty for leaving Jaiho behind, but she knew the information she carried might be Earth's only hope. The Perseverance was docked in the main spaceport, still a mile away. Sujin ducked into an alley as a patrol of Varian guards marched past. She needed to find a way back without being seen. "You look like you could use some help," said a voice from the shadows. Sujin spun around, ready to run. A small green alien with 3 legs stepped forward. It was Milo, the Tribby who had spoken to them at the palace. "Why would you help me?" Sujin asked, suspicious. Milo's large eyes blinked slowly. "Because for the first time in 90 years, someone has dared to question the Queen. Follow me. I know a safe path to your ship." Sujin hesitated, then nodded. She had few options. Milo led her through a maze of back streets and underground tunnels. The Varian Empire was not always like this, the alien said as they hurried along. Once it was a place of learning and trade. Then Queen Xara took power, and everything changed. "What happened to the real Queen Xara?" Sujin asked. Milo looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" "The machinery we found. It's creating some kind of illusion, isn't it?" Milo was quiet for a moment. "There are stories. Old stories passed down in secret. They say the true queen died centuries ago, but you didn't hear this from me. They reached the spaceport without being detected." Milo pointed to a service entrance that would take Sujin to her ship. "Your friend," Milo said. "The one who stayed behind. He is brave." "Yes," Sujin agreed, her voice tight with worry. "He is. The bravest ones don't always survive in the Varian Empire," Milo warned. "But sometimes they change things." The alien melted back into the shadows, leaving Sujin alone. She made it back to the Perseverance without being seen. When she reached the ship, she found Captain Hana pacing nervously in the cargo bay. "Sujin." Hana rushed forward. "Where's Jaiho?" "Captured, I think," Sujin said, trying to catch her breath. "But I got this." She held up the devices. "Captain, we were right. The Queen's power, it's all technology. Machines that create fear, that project an image." Hannah's face hardened. "Show me." In the ship's lab, Sujin connected her device to the computer. The data she had stolen from the palace began to appear on the screens. "It's incomplete," she explained as Hannah and Dr. Lee watched. "I couldn't copy everything before the alarms went off." "What is all this?" Dr. Lee asked, looking at the strange symbols and diagrams. "It's a control system," Sujin explained, "for the throne room and the Queen herself. Look at these frequency patterns. They match brain wave patterns for different species. And these?" She pointed to another diagram. "Holographic projectors, voice modulators, atmospheric controls. They're creating an illusion," Hannah said slowly. "The Queen we saw, she isn't real. I think she might be partly real," Sujin said. "The machinery might be enhancing a real person. Or maybe." She trailed off, not wanting to say what she was thinking. "Maybe there is no Queen at all," Dr. Lee finished for her. "Just a puppet controlled by someone else." Hannah picked up the second device, the one that had fallen from Visor Krull's belt. "What about this?" Su-Jin examined it carefully. I'm not sure. It looks like some kind of control device. Maybe a key to the systems we found. They were interrupted by Tai rushing into the lab. Captain, there's a message from the palace. They're demanding to speak with you immediately. Hannah's face was grim. Put them through to the conference room. Su-Jin, keep working on these devices. See what else you can learn. In the conference room, the large screen flickered to life. Visor Krill's golden face appeared. His expression was cold with anger. Captain Kim, he said, his voice clipped. Your people have committed a serious crime against the Varian Empire. What crime is that, Visor? Hannah asked calmly. Espionage. Trespassing in restricted areas. Theft of classified technology. The Visor's eyes narrowed. We have your security officer in custody. The camera moved, and Hannah saw Jio. He was standing between two large guards, his face bruised but his eyes alert. He gave her a small nod that only she would understand. He was okay. What were your people looking for, Captain? The Visor demanded. The truth, Hannah said simply. The Visor's face darkened. You were warned not to question the Queen's authority. Your actions have consequences. The human delegation is now confined to your ship until the audience with Her Majesty tomorrow. At that time, you will accept our terms without question, or your officer will be executed for his crimes. The screen went black. Hannah stood still for a long moment, thinking. Then she tapped her communicator. Su-Jin, Dr. Lee. Conference room. Now, when they arrived, Hannah's face was set with determination. Jeho is alive, but they're using him as leverage. We have until tomorrow's audience to figure this out. What are we going to do? Dr. Lee asked. We're going to find out exactly what that machinery is doing, Hannah said. And then we're going to use it against them. They worked through the night. Su-Jin analyzed the data from the palace systems. Dr. Lee studied the strange device from the Visor's belt. Together, they began to understand how the Queen's illusion worked. The fear effect is created by a network of emitters hidden in the throne room. Su-Jin explained, pointing to a diagram. They broadcast signals that target the fear centers in the brain of each species. And this device, Dr. Lee added, holding up the Visor's tool, seems to be a controller. It can override the system, or maybe protect the user from the fear effects. Can we use it? Hannah asked. Maybe, Su-Jin said. I've been studying the command codes in the data. If we can modify this device, we might be able to disrupt the entire system temporarily. How temporarily? Hannah asked. A few seconds, maybe a minute at most, Su-Jin admitted. That's not much time, Dr. Lee said. It might be enough, Hannah decided. If we can break the illusion, even for a moment, and show everyone what's really happening. She stood up straight. We need a plan. The next morning, the human delegation was escorted to the palace under heavy guard. The Varian soldiers watched them closely, weapons ready. The mood in the city had changed. Aliens hurried past with their heads down, avoiding eye contact. In the grand entrance hall, they saw Jeho. He stood between two guards, his wrists bound. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp. When he saw Hannah, he straightened his shoulders. You will enter the throne room when announced, said the guard captain. You will kneel before Her Majesty. You will accept her terms without question. Then your officer will be returned to you. We understand, Hannah said. The massive doors to the throne room swung open. Inside, the room was full. Delegations from dozens of worlds stood in their assigned places. All eyes turned to the humans as they entered. Hannah led her team to their place. She could feel the tension in the air. Everyone knew what had happened, that humans had dared to question the Queen's power. They were watching to see the punishment. The gong sounded 3 times, and the doors at the far end opened. The Queen entered on her floating platform, her masked face as cold and beautiful as before. As she approached, the wave of fear swept over the room. Aliens trembled and looked down. Some sank to their knees. Hannah felt the fear too, pressing against her mind. trying to make her kneel. But this time, she was ready for it. She knew what it was, and in her pocket, she held Sujin's modified device. The queen took her place on the throne. Her glowing eyes seemed to focus on Hana. Captain Kim of Earth, the queen's voice echoed through the chamber. You have defied my authority. You have sent spies into my palace. You have questioned my power. The fear in the room intensified. Around her, Hana could see her team struggling to remain standing. What do you have to say before I pronounce judgment? The queen demanded. Hana stepped forward. Her hand closed around the device in her pocket. The moment of truth had come. I say, Your Majesty, she said clearly, her voice carrying through the silent room, that it's time everyone saw what's behind the mask. Before the guards could react, Hana pulled out the device and pressed the activation button. For a split second, nothing happened. Then, with a high-pitched whine, the lights in the throne room flickered. The fear that had been pressing down on everyone suddenly vanished. And the queen changed. Her form seemed to waver, like a reflection in disturbed water. The glowing eyes of her mask dimmed. Her voice, which had been speaking words of anger, cut off mid-sentence. Gasps filled the room as aliens of all species saw what Hana saw. The queen's imposing height reduced. Her flowing robes lost their supernatural movement. And her mask. The mask became just that. A simple mask, with no glow behind the eye slits. Jai-Ho, now, Hana shouted. Jai-Ho, who had been waiting for this moment, broke free from his surprised guards. He ran toward the throne, faster than anyone could react. With a leap, he reached the queen and grabbed the golden mask. It came away in his hands. The throne room erupted in chaos. Aliens shouted and pushed forward to see. Guards rushed toward Jai-Ho, but stopped in confusion as they saw what everyone else was seeing. Behind the mask was no face at all. Instead, there was a complex arrangement of projectors, speakers, and sensors. A technological marvel, but not a living being. There is no queen, Jai-Ho called out, holding up the mask for all to see. It's a machine. An illusion. Visor Krell rushed forward, his face contorted with rage. Guards, seize them. But the guards hesitated. They too were seeing the truth for the first time. Some backed away in confusion. Others lowered their weapons. The device in Hana's hand sparked and died. Immediately, the systems began to reboot. The queen's form started to solidify again, the fear effect beginning to return. But it was too late. The illusion had been broken. Even as the fear pushed at their minds again, the aliens in the throne room knew what they had seen. Run, Hana shouted to her team. Back to the ship. As they fled the throne room, with Jai-Ho still clutching the queen's mask, they could hear the sounds of confusion and anger behind them. The palace was in chaos. The illusion that had ruled the galaxy for centuries had been shattered by one human's bold move. But their escape had only just begun. Hana, Jai-Ho, and the rest of the human team ran through the palace corridors. Behind them, they could hear shouting and the heavy footsteps of guards. The queen's mask was still clutched in Jai-Ho's hands, its empty eye sockets staring at nothing. This way, Sujin called, pointing to a side passage she remembered from her escape the night before. They turned down the narrow corridor, pushing past confused palace workers. The alarms were blaring now, and announcements in multiple languages ordered everyone to stay where they were. The main entrance will be blocked, Jai-Ho said, his voice rough from his time in custody. We need another way out. There's a service exit on the east side, Sujin said. Milo showed me. As they ran, they noticed something strange. Not all the palace guards were chasing them. Some seemed frozen in confusion. Others were arguing among themselves. The revelation about the queen had created chaos. They reached a junction where 4 corridors met. Suddenly, a group of Varian guards appeared, weapons raised. Stop, their leader shouted. By order off. He hesitated, confused about whose authority to invoke. That moment of hesitation was all Jai-Ho needed. He stepped forward, holding up the queen's mask for all to see. "Your queen is a lie," he said clearly. "A machine. A trick to control you and everyone else. Look." He turned the mask to show its hollow back, the wires and circuits inside. The guards looked at each other uncertainly, their weapons lowered slightly. From another corridor, Visor Krell appeared with more guards. His golden face was twisted with rage. "Shoot them," he screamed. "Kill the humans." But before the guards could act, a small green figure darted between them. It was Milo, the Trebi. "Wait," the small alien called out. "If you kill them, you'll never know the truth." Was it just the queen who was fake? Or have we all been lied to for centuries? Other aliens had gathered now. Palace workers, visiting diplomats, even some guards. They pressed forward, murmuring among themselves, eyes fixed on the mask in Jai-Ho's hands. "The Truth Council will decide what happens," Visor Krell declared. "Take the humans to the detention center." "Truth Council," Hannah repeated. "What is that?" A tall, insectoid alien stepped forward from the crowd. "The Truth Council is a myth," it said in a clicking voice. "A secret group that supposedly knows what really happens in the Empire. Many believe it doesn't exist." "Oh, it exists," said Milo, his large eyes blinking rapidly. "And Visor Krell knows it. Don't you, Visor?" All eyes turned to the golden-skinned alien. His four hands opened and closed nervously. "This is treason," he hissed. "You will all be punished." "By whom?" Jai-Ho asked, holding up the mask again. "Your queen can't punish anyone. She doesn't exist." The crowd's murmuring grew louder. More aliens were joining, pushing into the junction from all four corridors. Visor Krell looked around, seeing that he was losing control of the situation. With a snarl, he turned and ran down one of the corridors, shouting for his loyal guards to follow. "We should go," Hannah said quietly to her team, "while we can." But as they tried to move toward the exit, the crowd pressed around them. Not threatening, but curious. Desperate. "Please," said a tall, blue-skinned Varian. "Tell us what you know. Who has been ruling us? If not the queen, then who?" Hannah looked at the alien's face. There was no anger there, only confusion and a hunger for answers. She looked around and saw the same expression on dozens of faces. "I don't know," she admitted. "But I think some of you might. Those who work closest to the throne. Those who maintain the machinery we found." "The control room," whispered an elderly Varian technician. "I've worked in the palace systems for 40 years. We were never allowed inside. Only the Visor and his most trusted advisors had access." "Then let's find out," said Jai-Ho. He turned to the crowd. "Where is this control room?" The crowd moved through the palace like a wave. Aliens of all species joined as they went, drawn by the news spreading through the building. Guards stood aside, uncertain what to do without clear orders. The elderly technician led them to a heavily secured door deep within the palace. It was the same room where Jai-Ho and Su-Jin had discovered the machinery the night before. "This door has been sealed for as long as I can remember," the technician said. "We were told it contained dangerous equipment that powered the Queen's throne." "That was partly true," Su-Jin said. She stepped forward with the device they had taken from Visor Krell. "Let's see if this works." She pressed the device against the door's security panel. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft click, the door slid open. Inside was the room full of machinery that Jai-Ho and Su-Jin had found. But now, with the door fully open and the lights on, they could see it was much larger than they had realized. Banks of computers lined the walls. Screens displayed data in a dozen different languages. In the center stood the large device that hummed with power. But there was something else now. Against the far wall was a row of stasis pods, transparent chambers filled with a glowing blue fluid. And inside each pod was a body. Gasps rippled through the crowd as they saw what was inside. The bodies were of different species: Varian, Strill, Mori, Sarn, and others. All wore the same simple white garments. All appeared to be in a deep sleep. "What is this?" asked Milo, his voice hushed. Su Jin moved to a computer terminal. Her fingers moved over the controls as she tried to understand what she was seeing. "It's some kind of council," she said slowly. "These people are alive, but in a form of suspended animation. Their brain patterns are being monitored and recorded." "The Truth Council," whispered the insectoid alien. "It is real." Dr. Lee stepped forward, examining the pods with a scientist's eye. "These stasis fields are designed to preserve life for an extremely long time. Some of these people could have been here for centuries." Hana looked around the room, putting the pieces together. "This is who really rules the empire," she said. "Not a queen, but a council of the oldest, most powerful members of each species. They created the illusion of Queen Sara to maintain control." "But why?" asked a young Varian. "Why create a fake queen?" "Because people find it easier to follow a single, powerful figure than a committee," Jaiho said, "especially one that instills fear." Su Jin continued to work at the terminal. "According to these records, the real Queen Sara died over 200 years ago, without an heir. The empire was on the verge of civil war as different factions fought for control. So they created a fake queen," Hana finished, "and kept the truth hidden for centuries." A low growl came from the doorway. Visor Krull stood there, surrounded by a group of heavily armed guards. "And it worked," he snarled. "The Varian Empire has known peace for 200 years because of what we did. Do you think these squabbling species could govern themselves? There would be chaos, war, billions would die." "That wasn't your decision to make," Hana said firmly. "I am the last living member of the original council," Visor Krull said. His voice was proud, but tired. "I have given my life to maintaining the illusion, to keeping the peace. By keeping everyone afraid," Jaiho said, "by controlling them." "Yes," Krull shouted. "Fear works. Love fails. Respect fades. But fear is eternal." The crowd had grown silent, watching this exchange. The truth of their society, of their history, was being revealed before their eyes. "What happens now?" asked Milo, looking from the humans to Visor Krull. It was Hana who answered. "That's not for us to decide. We're visitors here. This is your empire, your history." She looked at the faces around her. Varian, Strill, Mori, Sarn, Trebi, and dozens of others. "It's up to all of you to decide what comes next." 3 days later, the Perseverance prepared to leave Varus Prime. On the view screen, Hana could see the city below. It looked different now, still beautiful, but somehow more alive. People moved more freely. The strict order had been replaced by a busy energy. "The interim government is asking to speak with you, Captain," Ta said from his communication station. Hana nodded. "Put them through." The screen changed to show a chamber where representatives from each species sat around a large table. Some Hana recognized. Milo was there, representing the Trebi. The elderly Varian technician sat nearby. Even Visor Krull was present, though he no longer wore his official robes. "Captain Kim," said the Varian representative who seemed to be leading the meeting. "We wanted to thank you before you departed." "I'm not sure thanks are in order," Hana said carefully. "We disrupted your entire society. You revealed a truth that needed to be known," said Milo. "It has not been easy. There has been anger, confusion, but also relief." "What will happen now?" Hana asked. "We are forming a true council," the Varian said, "with elected representatives from each world. No more rule by fear. No more secrets." "And the people in the stasis pods?" Hana asked. "They are being awakened slowly," said the insectoid representative. "Some have been asleep for over 100 years. They will need time to adjust, but their knowledge will be valuable as we rebuild." And Visor Krull. The camera moved to focus on the golden-skinned alien. He looked older somehow, more tired. I will stand trial for my actions, he said stiffly. But I have information that will be useful during the transition. I have been permitted to assist. Hannah nodded. It seemed fair. And what about Earth? What happens to our relationship with the Empire? We would like to establish true diplomatic relations, the Varian representative said. As equals. No forced tributes. No fear. Just mutual respect and trade. Relief washed over Hannah. This was better than she could have hoped for. Earth would be honored, she said. As the call ended, Jai-Ho stepped up beside her. The bruises on his face were healing, but there would be scars. So, he said, looking at the planet below. Mission accomplished. Hannah smiled. More than accomplished. When we set out, we were just hoping to negotiate better terms. Instead, we helped free an entire empire. All because you were willing to question what everyone else accepted, Jai-Ho said. To look behind the mask. On the bridge of the Perseverance the crew prepared for departure. As the ship lifted away from Paris Prime, Hannah knew that the story of what happened here would spread throughout the galaxy. How a small group of humans had dared to question the feared Masked Queen and shattered the illusion that had controlled countless worlds for centuries. It would change how the galaxy saw humans. Not as newcomers to be controlled, but as people who refused to be ruled by fear. People who sought truth, no matter how deeply it was hidden. As the ship accelerated toward the stars, Hannah looked at her crew, at Jai-Ho, Su-Jin, Dr. Lee, Tai, and all the others who had risked everything on this mission. Take us home, she said. Behind them, the Varian Empire was being reborn. Before them, Earth waited to hear their story. And throughout the galaxy, word was spreading about the humans, the species that had done what no one else dared to do. The species that had looked behind a mask and changed everything.